Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our series on making accessible apps in Apple platforms. And in this particular video we are going to be taking a look at how we can make adjustable views in the eyes of assistive technology. Now, remember how before, when we were talking about accessibility traits and accessibility roles, I mentioned that there is an adjustable trait and an incrementer role. Well, those are going to come into play right now. So I have a custom stepper in SwiftUI, AppKit, and UIKit. They each consist of a label and two buttons. Each of them are a singular accessibility element. They all have they each have a dynamic label, which is assigned as their accessibility label. They each have an accessibility value, and they each have their trait or role set to incrementer in the case of macOS, or adjustable in the case of UIKit. However, SwiftUI is slightly different in that the accessibility add traits modifier doesn't allow you to select incrementer or adjustable as a trait. There is an entire modifier that encapsulates all the work we're going to do on macOS with AppKit and iOS with UIKit into a single modifier, which is really nice. It makes it super easy. But first, I want to show you the way we used to have to do it before SwiftUI came around, and what we have to do if we're building an app in AppKit or UIKit even now. It's important to know how this stuff works under the hood, because remember, a lot of SwiftUI is still implemented using AppKit and UIKit behind the scenes. So let's get started by taking a look at AppKit. Right now on screen, I have a window open with my custom stepper in the center. You can see there are two buttons, increment and decrement, with the plus and minus signs, and then there is a value label in between them. Now, the sizing of this width-wise is dynamic, where the label's size will expand or shrink based on what the size of the window is and all that kind of stuff, based on the width anchor that we assign it when we're constraining the view itself. All right, so we can see in our window here, we get 0 number of students stepper. However, when we try to interact with it and increment the value or decrement the value, nothing happens. And that's because we haven't implemented the functionality to actually allow assistive technologies to adjust that value. Now, in AppKit, there are two methods that we need to override in order to get this functionality to work. And these two methods return a Boolean determining whether or not the accessibility increment or accessibility decrement actions were actually successful. And the first method is accessibility perform increment, and the second is accessibility perform decrement. Their names are pretty self-explanatory. The increment method, the accessibility perform increment method allows the assistive technology to increment a value, while accessibility perform decrement allows assistive technology to decrement a value for an adjustable view. So let's go ahead and implement these. So in Xcode, we're going to go all the way down here to the bottom of our NSControl subclass. And we'll say override func accessibility perform increment, like this. Accessibility perform increment. And inside of here, we're going to place the code that we want to execute when our assistive technology tries to increment the value. So here, we'll say if value is less than the maximum value, we want to say value plus equals step, because if our value is the maximum value, we obviously don't want it to go up again. However, we haven't returned a Boolean yet. So what we are going to do is right after we increment our value, we will return true to indicate, hey, this was successful. Otherwise, we will return false to indicate that the action was not successful. All right. Next, we are going to override the accessibility perform decrement method. All right. So override accessibility perform decrement, like that. Now, here we'll say if value is greater than the minimum value, we want to say value minus equals step with a return of true, like that, and then return false otherwise, just like that. And so now we have both of these methods implemented. If we run our code now, here's our app. We get 0 number of students, stepper. Let's interact with our stepper, and we will increment the value. And now you can see we're able to increment it and decrement it. Our value will never go below 0. And if we try to increment it above a certain level, it will never go above 24, because that is what we have set as our maximum value in the view controller. All right, so that is how we can increment and decrement a value in a custom stepper using AppKit and its accessibility features. Pretty simple, but it's a little bit. There's some work that you actually that you have to do to get it to work. It's still simple, but not quite as quick as you'll see when we take a look at Swift UI. But for now, let's go ahead and go into UIKit land here. And then here we have the same kind of story. So I'm going to go into my toolbar here. I'm going to make sure that we have the right run destination. We're going to have it run in Mac Catalyst mode, just to make it easier on me, so I don't have to do any screen mirroring or anything of that nature. But here is our application in Mac Catalyst. You can see that we have 2 buttons and our value label. The buttons are in a bordered prominent configuration. So this is entirely native UIKit stuff. Nothing custom in particular in terms of how the buttons are configured and all that. All of this is contained in a UI control subclass, much like our stepper in AppKit is contained within an NS control subclass. But like I mentioned in the beginning, that we do have some accessibility properties already set, such as its value, its label, and its traits, and the stepper itself being an accessibility element. All right, so now we need to actually do the same sort of thing that we did in AppKit, where there are 2 methods we need to override, but they're not the same method. The signatures aren't the same. In UIKit, we need to override the accessibility increment and accessibility decrement methods. So if we go down to the bottom of our UI control, you can go down to the bottom here, and we'll say override func accessibility increment and override func accessibility decrement. And there are those methods. We don't have any implementations for this yet, but you can see that these methods don't return anything. So we don't have to return a true or false value to indicate success or failure, which is also nice. It's less code. Granted, it's a couple lines less code, but it's less code nonetheless. So let's go ahead and go into our accessibility increment method and implement those the lines of code we need in that. Well, I think I misspelled something here. There we go. Yep, we're good. Okay. We're going to save that now. We'll say if value is less than the maximum value, we'll say value plus equals step. Just like that. And then for accessibility decrements, we will say if value is greater than the minimum value, we'll say value minus equals step, like that. All right, we can save it and run our code now. Here's our user interface again. When we focus on our stepper here, in Mac Catalyst, it interprets it as a slider. So we'll hear 0, number of students, slider. But on the iPhone and the iPad, when it's running in iOS mode, we'll hear number of students, 0, adjustable. And let's go ahead and interact with this slider, quote unquote slider, and we will try to increment the value. And you can see here, we can increment the value. And now that it's at 24, which is the maximum value I have set in my main screen view controller, it will not go up any longer because we have set, because frankly, we've gone to our maximum. But if we go down again, and we try to go past 0, we can't go past 0 because 0 is the minimum. All right, so that is our stepper in UIKit. And now that our custom stepper in UIKit has been made fully accessible, let's go ahead and finally take a look at how we can do this in Swift UI. So I'm going to go ahead and close this application. Let's go ahead, and we want Swift UI. So here we're going to add a modifier. But first, before we add this modifier, I want you to add a function to this view here. And this function is going to be called adjust. And this function is going to take one parameter. We're going to call it direction. And the type is going to be accessibility adjustment direction. This type will allow us to determine the direction in which the user wants the value to go. Do they want to increment the value? Do they want to decrement the value? What do they want to do, right? So let's go ahead and say private func adjust, we'll say underscore direction accessibility adjustment direction. This doesn't need to return anything. In fact, it shouldn't return anything. And then we will implement the logic here in a moment. We'll just leave this blank for now. All right, let's go ahead and add our modifier first before we even begin doing anything. All right, so we can say dot accessibility adjustment action. Adjustable action. Okay. Now, accessibility adjustment or adjustable action. This modifier takes in a handler, and this handler is a closure that takes in a accessibility adjustment direction as its parameter. So you can see why we created that method now. So we can just pass it a reference to that adjust method. So adjust like that. And now that will work. If we go ahead and save this and run it, we get a build failure, probably because I have an error in my content view. So let's go ahead and change that. Yep. That's what I thought. So let's go ahead and quickly change this here. All right. All right. So here we'll say minimum value equals 0 and maximum value is 24. There. Okay. Okay, so I need to fix that again here. All right, value. All right. Okay, minimum value of 0. Okay. All right, so let's save that. Now let's run it. Okay, build successful. Now, remember, we don't have anything in our adjust method. So if we try to adjust the value here, nothing will happen. Because while we have the modifier set, and it does announce as number of students 0 slider, like we expected it to, just like it did with the UI kit, there's nothing in the method to execute, so it can't do anything. Let's go back in and add that functionality. So let's jump to definition. We'll go all the way down here to our adjust method. And in here, we'll say switch direction. So we want specific cases depending on the direction that the adjustment gesture for assistive technologies is, depending on what direction the user wants to adjust the value in. So we'll say case dot increment. In this case, we want to say if the value is less than the maximum value, then we will say value plus equals step. Next, we can say case dot decrement. And in here, much of the same thing. If value is greater than minimum value, we can say value minus equals step. Just like that. Now, of course, you could put the increment and decrement logic into its own method, but we're not for right now. You could if you would like, but to save time, that's what we're doing. Now, if we save our code and we run it now, all right, successful build. We get number of students 0 slider being announced to us, or in iOS we would get number of students 0 adjustable. Let's try to update the value. And we do in fact get our value incremented. Let's try to decrement the value. And we do. Okay, so that pretty much does it really for how we can make an adjustable view in the eyes of assistive technology using UIKit, AppKit, and SwiftUI. You can see how with UIKit and AppKit, while it is simple to do, it does take a little bit more time and a little bit more effort, but it's all worth it in the end, because then you're making your app just that much more accessible to users with disabilities, which is extraordinarily important. All right, thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.